In A.R. Antule vs. R.S. Nayak, A 1998 SC 1531, a constitution bench of the Supreme Court, by its order had withdrawn the prosecution of Mr. Antule from the special judge, who had been trying the case, and had directed the Chief Justice of Bombay High Court to nominate a High Court judge, before whom the trial could proceed. Pursuant to this direction, a High Court judge was nominated to hold the trial. Mr. Antule questioned this direction by a writ petition under Article 32 of the Constitution, which was rejected by a two-judge bench. Subsequently, when the trial in the High Court reached the stage of framing of charges, Mr. Antule filed a special leave petition in the Supreme Court under Article 136 of the Constitution questioning the jurisdiction of the High Court judge to conduct the trial on the ground, inter alia, that the whole thing was violative of his fundamental rights guaranteed by Article 14 and 21 of the Constitution. A two-judge bench granted special leave and referred the case to a special bench of 7 judges. The Supreme Court by majority upheld the contention of Mr. Antule that since under Article 21, an accused had a minimum guaranteed right of one appeal against a decision of the trial court, the denial of this right was an infringement of Article 21 of the Constitution. The majority further held that since the offences could be triable by special judges only, the order transferring the cases to the High Court was unauthorized by law. By its directions, the Supreme Court could not confer jurisdiction on the High Court, such power being purely legislative. A superior court could always correct its own error brought to its notice either by way of petition or ex debito justitiae. The singling out of the appellant for a speedier trial by the High Court for an offence where it lacked jurisdiction to try persons under the Act was unwarranted. Further, the court had disregarded relevant provisions of the law and the decision in State of West Bengal vs. Anwar Ali Sarkar, A 1952 SC 75, which was a binding precedent. The directions were thus legally wrong. By creating a special court for him, the court violated Articles 14 and 21 of the Constitution, considering that avenues for revision and appeal had been closed to him. The concurring opinion held that the injustice done should be corrected by applying the principle actus curia neminem gravabit. The dissenting opinion, however, was that since a previous bench had interpreted the law, in light of the very nature of the function of the judiciary, another could not sit in judgment upon the correctness of the decision, except in the course of a review petition. The existence of jurisdiction, it asserted, does not depend on the correctness of its exercise. The privilege inherent in judicial decision-making was indispensable to every judicial function. If it were not so, every judicial decision would be open to ridicule. The maxim actus curia neminem gravabit had no application to conscious conclusions reached in a judicial decision, nor did it confer power to reassess a final decision. In Rupa Ashok Hara vs. Ashok Hara, A 2002 SC 1771, the issue was whether a writ petition can be maintained under Article 32 to question the validity of a judgment of apex court after the review petition has been dismissed. The court in this case agreed with the ruling of 9-judge bench decision in Naresh case, and held that an order passed by the Supreme Court was not amenable to the writ jurisdiction under Article 32. Majority judgment held that a judicial order cannot be said to contravene fundamental right of the petitioners under Article 19, 1a. The dissenting judgment of Justice Hidayatullah, however, held that an order of the High Court contravening the fundamental rights could be quashed by issuing a writ to the High Court under Article 32. It may thus be stated that it is now settled position that the superior courts, while discharging judicial functions, are not state for the purpose of Article 12 of the Constitution, but while exercising its rule-making power it would be covered for the purpose of Article 12 of the Constitution. Comment. There is no reason why judiciary should not be treated as included within the definition of the state in Article 12 of the Constitution, and there is no reason why, in appropriate cases, the guaranteed remedy for the enforcement of fundamental rights should not be available against courts, including the Supreme Court of India. This would not erode the prestige of the judiciary, it would rather enhance it. Note 1. A general proposition may now be stated thus: a body, whether statutory or non-statutory authority, corporations, registered societies, government companies or any other like entity, whether exercising functions of a commercial or non-commercial nature, will be regarded as an authority, and hence, state, under Article 12 if it can be regarded as an instrumentality of the government. 2. The definition of the term state is limited in its application only to Part 3 and Part 4, and it does not extend to the other provisions of the Constitution. For example, Articles 309, 310, 311 etc., which find a place in Part 14. Concept of law under Article 130.8. Laws inconsistent with fundamental rights, Article 13. Article 13(1) declares that all laws in force in the territory of India immediately before the commencement of this Constitution shall be void to the extent to which they are inconsistent with the provisions of Part 3 of the Constitution. 4. Anil Kumar Rai, Concept of State and Fundamental Rights, 142, 1996. Q. 8. Article 13 of the Constitution uses the words, to the extent of such inconsistency be void. Explain it by citing relevant decided case by the courts. DU. LL. B. 2019. Article 13(2) provides that the state shall not make any law which takes away or abridges the fundamental rights conferred by Part 3 of the Constitution, and any law made in contravention of fundamental rights shall, to the extent of contravention, be void. So, Article 13(2) applies to post-Constitution laws. Article 13(3) gives the term law a very broad connotation which includes any ordinance, order, bylaw, rule, regulation, notification, custom or usage having the force of law. Thus, not only the legislative enactment, but anything mentioned here can be challenged as infringing a fundamental right. Article 13 provides teeth to the fundamental rights. It makes these rights justifiable, i.e., enforceable in the courts. It declares all laws, whether pre-constitutional or post-constitutional, void, if they are inconsistent with or abridge or violate the fundamental rights. Article 13 in fact provides for the judicial review of all legislations in India, past as well as future. This power has been conferred on the High Courts and the Supreme Court of India, Article 226, Article 32, which can declare a law unconstitutional if it is inconsistent with any of the provisions of Part 3 of the Constitution. The whole provision of Article 13 can be divided under following headings: prospective or retrospective. The analysis of Article 13(1) and Article 13(2) makes it clear that the guarantee is against the existing laws and future laws, but it is not against the laws made before the commencement of the Constitution. The rights and liabilities that have accrued under the law which is inconsistent or in contravention with the provision of Part 3, i.e., fundamental rights, but has been made before the commencement of the Constitution, can be enforced. Article 13 thus has no retrospective effect. 1. Doctrine of ECLIPSEQ. 9. Q. 10. Q. 11. The prospective nature of Article 13(1) has given rise to the doctrine of eclipse. The doctrine of eclipse deals with pre-constitution laws or existing laws. Q. 9. Explain the doctrine of eclipse. DU. LL. B. 2016, 2008. Q. 10. Can a void statute be revived by constitutional amendment? Discuss doctrine of eclipse and distinguish it from the doctrine of severability. DU. LL. B. 2014. Q. 11. The view that the expressions void and to the extent of such inconsistency and to the extent of the contravention used respectively in Articles 13(1) and in Article 13(2) carry same meaning, entails the conclusion that the doctrine of eclipse may have application as well to laws made after the Constitution has come into force. Explain. DU. LL. B. 2017. The law which has been valid at its inception but has become invalid on the coming into force of the Constitution of India by reason of being inconsistent with the fundamental rights guaranteed in Part 111 of the Constitution is treated to be dormant but not dead, and therefore if by the subsequent amendment of the Constitution the inconsistency which has made it unconstitutional is removed, the law will become free from infirmity and will become enforceable, i.e. this is called doctrine of eclipse. Leading case laws. Keshavan Madhavan Menon vs. State of Bombay. Air 1951 SC 128. Facts. The petitioner Secretary of People's Publishing House Limited, having violated Section 18 of the Indian Press, Emergency Powers Act, 1931 by publishing an article, Railway Mazdoor ke khilaf Nai Sazish, was prosecuted in 1949. During the pendency of criminal proceedings, the Constitution of India came into force and the petitioner challenged the validity of the Act on the ground that it was inconsistent with the fundamental rights under Article 19(1)(a) and 19(2), and pleaded that proceedings commenced against him before the commencement of the Constitution could not be continued after the commencement of the Constitution. Issue: whether a prosecution commenced before the coming into force of the Constitution could be continued after the Constitution came into force, as the Act in question there became void as violative of Article 19(1)(a) and 19(2). Decision: the Supreme Court held that Article 13(1) has no retrospective effect and it is wholly prospective in its operation, and therefore the proceedings under the impugned Act which were pending at the commencement of the Constitution were not affected, even if the impugned Act was inconsistent with the fundamental rights under Article 19(1)(a). The Supreme Court has made it clear that fundamental rights which were, for the first time, created by the Constitution became operative on and from the date of enforcement of the Constitution, and therefore Article 13(1) can have no retrospective effect but is wholly prospective in operation. The Supreme Court further observed as follows. 1. A law in force before the commencement of the Constitution, if inconsistent with a fundamental 1. A law in force before the commencement of the Constitution, if inconsistent with a fundamental right, did not become void, in toto, or for all purposes or for all times or for all persons. Such laws become void only to the extent of its inconsistency with the fundamental right. The law became void qua persons, whose fundamental rights it violates. 2. The existing law, because of its inconsistency with a fundamental right, was not completely obliterated or wiped out altogether from the statute book. But, such law existed for all past transactions and for enforcement of rights and liabilities accrued before the date of the Constitution. The law continued in force even after the commencement of the Constitution with respect to persons, of non-citizens, whose rights it did not violate. 3. The only effect of Article 13(1) on the inconsistent law was that, qua persons entitled to the fundamental right, the law became ineffective or imperative for the time being. The law got into a dormant or moribund state, or that it was shadowed by the fundamental right it violated, or that it was so eclipsed. 4. If by an amendment of the fundamental right, the shadow on that law was removed, the law would get revived and operative. So, doctrine of eclipse is based on the principle that a law which violates fundamental rights is not nullity or void ab initio but becomes only unenforceable. Can a law which becomes unenforceable after the Constitution came into force be again revived and made effective by an amendment in the Constitution? Bhikaji Naren Dhakras vs. State of MP. Air 1955 SC 781. A case relating to a pre-constitution law. Facts. The CPN Berar Motor Vehicles Amendment Act, 1947, authorized the state government to exclude all private motor transport business. This provision, though valid when enacted, became void on the coming into the force of the Constitution in 1950 as violated Article 19(1)(g) of the Constitution. But this infirmity in the Act was removed by the Constitution, First Amendment Act, 1951, which added sub-clause I to Clause 6 in Article 19, which authorizes the government to monopolize any business. It was challenged by the petitioner. Decision. The Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of the impugned Act and enunciated the doctrine of eclipse. 1. The court held that the effect of the amendment was to remove the shadow and to make the impugned Act free from all blemish or infirmity. 2. It became enforceable against citizens as well as non-citizens after the constitutional impediment was removed. 3. The law was merely eclipsed for the time being by the fundamental rights. Soon as the eclipse is removed, the law begins to operate from the date of such removal. Does the doctrine of eclipse apply to a post-constitutional law? Article 13(2) relates to future laws, i.e., laws made after the commencement of the Constitution. The doctrine of eclipse is invoked only in cases of pre-constitutional law and is not applicable in case of post-constitutional law. If a post-constitutional law is inconsistent with the Constitution, it is void ab initio. A fundamental right is a constitutional limitation upon the legislative power of the legislatures. Article 13(2) expressly states this limitation. In Deep Chand vs. State of UP, A 1959 SC 648, the Supreme Court held that a post-constitutional law made under Article 13(2), which contravenes a fundamental right, is nullity from its inception in a stillborn law. It is void ab initio. The doctrine of eclipse does not apply to post-constitutional laws and therefore, a subsequent constitutional amendment cannot revive it. The minority, however, expressed the view that the doctrine of eclipse is applicable even to post-constitutional law. In Mahendra Lal Jan vs. State of UP, A 1963 SC 1019, the Supreme Court approved the majority view expressed in Deep Chand's case and held that the doctrine of eclipse applies only to pre-constitutional law under Article 13(1) and not to post-constitutional law under Article 13(2). There is a clear distinction between a pre-constitutional law and a post-constitutional law. The voidness of the pre-constitution is not from its inception but only from the date of the commencement of the Constitution. On the other hand, the voidness of a post-constitutional law is from its very inception, and such a law cannot therefore exist for any purpose. But in a Baka Mills case, the Supreme Court modified its view taken in Deep Chand case and held that a post-constitutional law which is inconsistent with fundamental right is not nullity or non-existent in all cases and all purposes. The doctrine of absolute nullity is not a universal rule and there are many exceptions to it. Leading case law. State of Gujarat vs. Ambika Mills. Air 1974 SC 1300. Facts. In this case, Ambika Mills filed a writ petition in the High Court of Gujarat challenging the constitutional validity of certain provisions of Bombay Labour Welfare Fund Act, 1953, and prayed for the issue of writ in the nature of mandamus against the state of Gujarat, to desist from enforcing the direction to pay unpaid accumulations to the employees, in the notice to the petitioner. The High Court decided in favor of Ambika Mills, holding impugned provisions unconstitutional and void. The state of Gujarat came in appeal before the Supreme Court. Issue: whether Ambika Mills was competent to challenge the validity of impugned provisions on the basis that they violated fundamental right under Article 19(1)(f) of citizen employers of employees and thus show that the law was void and non-existent and therefore the action taken against it was bad. And whether the definition of establishment under Section 2(4) violated the fundamental right of the respondent under Article 14 and the impugned provisions were void for that reason. Decision: holding that the impugned sections are valid, the court held that the inclusion of tramway and motor omnibus service in the definition of establishment did not make the classification unreasonable having regard to the purpose of legislation. With respect to the other issue, the court held that just as a pre-constitutional law taking away or abridging fundamental right under Article 19 remained after the Constitution came into force as against non-citizens as it was not inconsistent with their fundamental rights, so also a post-constitution law offending Article 19 remained operative as against non-citizens as it was not in contravention of any of their fundamental rights. If a law is otherwise good and does not contravene any of their fundamental rights, non-citizens cannot plead that the law is absolutely null and void and inapplicable to them simply because it is inconsistent with some of the fundamental rights of the citizen. The meaning of the word void is same both in Article 13, 1 and 2, and for that reason a post-constitution law which takes away or abridges rights conferred by Article 19 should be operative as regards non-citizens as it is void only to the extent of contravention of rights conferred on citizens under Article 19. In other words, voidness is not in rem, but to the extent of inconsistency or contravention of fundamental rights. The phrase, to the extent of contravention, can mean only to the extent of the contravention of rights conferred. There are many fundamental rights and they inhere in diverse types of persons, minorities, or denominations, and if a law abridges fundamental right of one class of persons, or minorities, it should not be void as against others who have no such fundamental right. Finally, Supreme Court held that Bombay Welfare Act, 1953 was valid in respect of non-citizens. Ambika Mills being a company was therefore not a citizen, it could not take the plea that its right to property i.e. Article 19, 1f, was being taken or abridged without the authority of law. Dulare Lodh vs. Additional District Judge, Kanpur. Air 1984 SC 1260. Facts. In this case, the respondent landlord filed a suit for ejectment in 1971 and obtained a decree for ejectment against the appellant tenant. By virtue of the provisions of the UP Urban Buildings, Regulation of Letting, Rent and Eviction Act, 1972, the case was transferred to the Court of the Judge of Small Causes, who tried the case and passed decree in favor of the respondent in 1973. The tenant did not object to the jurisdiction nor did he prefer an appeal or revision against the judgment and the same became final. The landlord filed execution petition but his attempt to get the decree executed is stalled sometimes by objection filed by tenant and sometimes by amendments in law and with the result that even after 13 years of litigation, the landlord was not able to get possession. This was because of the statutory amendment which made the decree inexecutable and was therefore lying dormant and ineffective. But by virtue of Amendment Act of 1976, Section 9 of the UP Civil Laws Amendment Act of 1972 was made applicable with retrospective effect which was enacted to remove the injustice and to remedy mischief caused to the decree holder. Its object was to revive the decrees which had become unexecutable. Decision. The Supreme Court applied the doctrine of eclipse to post-constitutional law even against citizens and held that by virtue of the Amendment Act, 1976 the decree which was lying dormant and could not be executed became executable. Once the bar placed by the UP Urban Buildings, Regulation of Letting, Rent and Eviction Act, 1972, removed by virtue of the doctrine of eclipse the decree will revive and become operative and executable. Post-constitution laws added to 9th schedule. In L. Jagannath vs. Authorized Officer, A 1972 SC, the Apex Court held that an act declared unconstitutional under Articles 14, 19 and 31, 2, is revived when it put in the 9th schedule. The express words of Article 31b cure the defect if such an act with retrospective operation from the date it was put on the statute book. Such an act, even though inoperative when enacted because of its inconsistency with a fundamental right, assumes full force and vigor retrospectively as soon as it is included in the IX schedule. It is not necessary to reenact such an act. So, this case overruled Deep Chand vs. State of UP, A 1959 SC 648 case. However, in IR. Coelho vs. State of Tamil Nadu, A 277 C 861, the Apex Court held that laws made under IX schedule after the 24th of April 1973 can be challenged if perceived violating fundamental rights which affect the basic structure of constitution. Thus, The IX schedule immunity is not absolute. 2. Doctrine of WAIVERQ. 12. OR. Waiver of fundamental rights. The doctrine of waiver states that a person who is entitled to a right or privilege is free to waive that right or privilege, and once that person has waived his right, he would not be allowed to claim it afterwards. So, the question arises whether a citizen can waive his fundamental rights. Behram vs. State of Bombay, A 1955 SC 123, was the first case in which question of waiver was argued. In this case, court held that the doctrine of waiver has no application to the provision of law enshrined in Part 3 of the Constitution. It is not open to an accused person to waive or give up his constitutional rights and get convicted. The court repudiated the doctrine of waiver, saying that the fundamental rights were not put in the Constitution merely for individual benefit. These rights were there as a matter of policy, and therefore, the doctrine of waiver have no application in case of fundamental rights. A citizen cannot invite discrimination by telling the state, "You can discriminate or get convicted," by waiving the protection given to him under Articles 20 and 21. The question of waiver of a fundamental right has been discussed in detail by the Supreme Court in Basheshwar Nath vs. CIT. A 1959 SC 149. After the Commission had decided upon the amount of concealed income under Section 5(1) of the Taxation of Income, Investigation Commission, Act, 1947, the petitioner on May 19, 1954, agreed as a settlement to pay in monthly installments over Rs. 3 lakhs by way of tax and penalty. In 1955, the Supreme Court declared Section 5(1) ultra vires of Article 14. The petitioner thereupon challenged the settlement between him and the Commission, but the plea of waiver was raised against him. The Supreme Court, however, upheld his contention and observed as follows. 1. Article 14 cannot be waived, for as it is an admonition to the state as a matter of public policy with a view to implement its object of ensuring equality. No person can, therefore, by any act or conduct, relieve the state of the solemn obligation imposed on it by the Constitution. Q. 12. Write short note on waiver of fundamental rights. D.U. LL. B. 2011. 2. None of the fundamental rights can be waived by a person. The fundamental rights are mandatory on the state, and no citizen can, by his act or conduct, relieve the state of the solemn obligation imposed on it. The Constitution makes no distinction between fundamental rights enacted for the benefit of an individual and those enacted in public interest or on grounds of public policy. A large majority of the people in India are economically poor, educationally backward, and politically not yet conscious of their rights. Individually or even collectively, they cannot be pitted against the state, and, therefore, it is the duty of the judiciary to protect their rights against themselves. 3. An individual could waive a fundamental right which was for his benefit, but he could not waive a right which was for the benefit of the general public. In view of the majority decision in Basheshwar Nath case, it is now an established proposition that an individual cannot waive any of his fundamental rights. This proposition has been applied in a number of cases. In Yusuf Ali vs. M.S. Kasbeka, A 1982 Boom. 135, the court held that the state cannot arrogate to itself a right to commit breach of the fundamental rights of any person by resorting to principles of waiver or estoppel or other similar principles. Similarly, in Omega Advertising Agency vs. State Electricity Board, A 1982 Go. 37, the Guwahati High Court has explained that the fundamental rights have been embodied in the Constitution not merely for the benefit of a particular individual but also as a matter of constitutional policy and for public good, and, therefore, the doctrine of waiver or acquiescence cannot be applied thereto. In Oliga Tallis vs. Bombay Municipal Corporation, AIR 1986 SC 180, the Apex Court asserted that the purpose which the Constitution seeks to achieve by conferment of fundamental rights is not only to benefit the individual but to secure the larger interests of the community. Therefore, even if a person says, either under mistake of law or otherwise, that he would not enforce any particular fundamental right, it cannot create an estoppel against him. Such a concession, if enforced, would defeat the purpose of the Constitution. Was the argument of estoppel valid? An all-powerful state could easily tempt an individual to forego his precious personal freedoms on promise of transitory, immediate benefits. In this case, the pavement dwellers gave an undertaking that they would not claim any fundamental right to put up huts on pavements or public roads and that they would not obstruct the demolition of the huts after a certain date. Later, when the huts were sought to be demolished after the specified date, the pavement dwellers put up the plea that they were protected by Article 21. It was argued in the Supreme Court that they could not raise any such plea in view of their previous undertaking. The court overruled the objection, saying that fundamental rights could not be waived. There can be no estoppel against the Constitution, which is the paramount law of the land. The court observed, no individual can barter away the freedoms conferred on him by the Constitution. In Narsingh Pal vs. Union of India, AIR 2000 SC 1401, the Supreme Court has observed, fundamental rights under the Constitution cannot be bartered away. They cannot be compromised, nor can there be any estoppel against the exercise of fundamental rights available under the Constitution. The doctrine of non-waiver developed by the Supreme Court of India denotes manifestation of its role of protector of the fundamental rights. However, in USA, a fundamental right can be waived. 3. Doctrine of severability separability. Doctrine of severability means that if an offending provision can be separated from that which is constitutional, then only that part which is offending is to be declared as void and not the entire statute. It provides that, where only a part of the law is inconsistent with or contravenes the fundamental right, it is only that part which shall be void under Article 13 and not the whole of the law. The courts apply the doctrine of severability or separability to separate the valid portion of the law from the invalid portion. In several cases, the court has declared some provisions void and the remaining act valid. Article 13(1) provides that all laws in force in the territory of India immediately before the commencement of this Constitution, insofar as they are inconsistent with the provisions of this part, shall, to the extent of such inconsistency, be void. Article 13(2) provides that the state shall not make any law which takes away or abridges the rights conferred by this part, and any law made in contravention of this clause shall, to the extent of the contravention, be void. The words, to the extent of such inconsistency be void, in Article 13(1) and 13(2) means that only the repugnant provisions of the law in question shall. 5. State of Bombay vs. F.N. Balsara, AIR 1951 SC 318. Be treated by courts as void and not the entire statute. The primary test is whether what remains is so inextricably mixed with the part declared invalid that what remains cannot survive independently. Article 13(1) and Article 13(2) thus declare that laws inconsistent with or in contravention of the fundamental rights shall be void to the extent of inconsistency or contravention, as the case may be. The doctrine of severability has been applied by the Supreme Court in the case of challenge to the validity of an amendment of the Constitution, on the ground of disregard of the substantive limitation on the amending power of Parliament, namely, alteration of the basic structure of the Constitution. In A.K. Gopalan vs. State of Madras, AIR 1950 SC 27, only Section 14 of the Preventive Detention Act, 1949 was declared void and the rest of the Act was allowed to continue, because only Section 14 of the said Act was found to be inconsistent with the fundamental rights and the unconstitutional provisions of the Act could be separated from the rest. In determining whether or not the unconstitutional provisions can be separated from the constitutional provisions of the statute, the intention of the legislature should be taken into account, i.e., the intention of the legislature is the determining factor, and in determining the intention of the legislature, history, preamble, object and title of the statute should be taken into account. In State of Bombay vs. F.N. Balsara, A 1951 SC 318, it was held that if an offending provision can be separated from that which is constitutional, then only that part which is offending is to be treated as void and not the entire statute. In RMDCV. Union of India, A 1957 SC 628, the Constitutionality of the Prize Competitions Act 1955 was challenged on the ground that it violated the fundamental right of the petitioners secured by Article 19(1)(g). The Impugned Act provided for the control and regulation of prize competitions. It was contended that Section 2(d) of the Impugned Act, which defined the expression prize competitions, included not only competitions of a gambling nature but also those in which success to a substantial degree depends on skill. Having regard to the circumstances under which the Impugned Act was passed, the Supreme Court held that it was to control and regulate prize competitions of a gambling character. Therefore, the court stated that the application of impugned provision of the Act could be restricted to the competitions of gambling character. The provisions of the Impugned Act were thus held severable in their application to competitions, in which success did not depend, to any substantial extent, on skill. The court held that when a statute was in part void, it would be enforced as regards the rest, if that was severable from what was invalid. The court then referred to the rules of construction laid down by the American courts for the operation of the doctrine of severability and applied these to the present case. The Supreme Court then summed up the rules relating to severability. 1. In determining whether the valid parts of the statute are separable from the invalid parts thereof, it is the intention of the legislature that is the determining factor. The test to be applied is whether the legislature would have enacted the valid part if it had known that the rest of the statute was invalid. 2. If the valid and invalid provisions are so inextricably mixed up that they cannot be separated from one another, then the invalidity of a portion must result in the invalidity of the Act in its entirety. On the other hand, if they are so distinct and separate that after striking out what is invalid, what remains is in itself a complete code independent of the rest, then it will be upheld notwithstanding that the rest has become unenforceable. 3. Even when the provisions which are valid are distinct and separate from those which are invalid, if they all form parts of a single scheme which is intended to be operative as a whole, then also the invalidity of a part will result in the failure of the whole. 4. Likewise, when the valid and invalid parts of a statute are independent and do not form part of a scheme, but what is left after remitting the invalid portion is so thin and truncated as to be in substance different from what it was when it emerged out of the legislature, then also it will be rejected in its entirety. 5. The separability of the valid and invalid provision of a statute does not depend on whether the law is enacted in the same section or different sections. Vide Kohli's Constitutional Limitations, Vol. I, pp. 361 to 362, it is not the form, but the substance of the matter that is material, and that has to be ascertained on an examination of the Act as a whole and of the setting of the relevant provision therein. 6. If after the invalid portion is expunged from the statute what remains cannot be enforced without making alterations and modifications therein, then the whole of it must be struck down as void, as otherwise it will amount to judicial legislation. 7. In determining the legislative intent on the question of separability, it will be legitimate to take into account the history of legislation, its object, the title and the preamble to it. In Minerva Mills Limited, v. Union of India, A 1980 SC 1789, the Supreme Court struck down Sections 4 and 5 of the Constitution, 42nd Amendment, Act, 1976 as beyond the amending power of the Parliament. These two sections were severed and declared void, and the rest of the Act was held to be constitutionally valid. In Quixota Holohan vs. Zachilhu, A 1993 SC 412, the Supreme Court has held that the doctrine of severability can be applied to a composite amendment which contains amendments in the provisions which do not require ratification by the state and amendments which require such ratification. In this case, the court has held that Para 6 of the X schedule does not abrogate judicial review under Articles 136, 226 and 227 and therefore is valid, but Para 7 of the X schedule, which excludes the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court and the High Courts under Articles 136 and 226 respectively in respect of any matter connected with disqualification on defection under this schedule, but it has not been ratified by the legislatures of one half of the states in terms of proviso to Clause 2 of Article 368 and therefore it is unconstitutional. Meaning of terms, law, and law in force, Articles 13(3) and 13(4). Meaning of the term, law, Article 13(3)(a). Article 13(3)(a) defines the word, law. Law for the purpose of Article 13 includes any ordinance, order, by-law, rule, regulation, notification, custom or usages having in the territory of India the force of law. Like the definition of the term state contained in Article 12, the term law has been given a wide connotation. The object is to ensure that fundamental rights should not be infringed or violated, not only by the state, its legislative or executive organs, but also by its instrumentalities or agencies. 1. The word law, thus, includes not only enacted law or legislation, but also any of the things stated above. Thus, the custom or usage having the force of law is included within the meaning of the word law. 2. Administrative orders or by-laws of a municipal or statutory body are included within the meaning of the word law. 3. A notification and orders issued under a statute or regulation made by statutory corporation are also included within the meaning of the word law. 4. A resolution passed by a state government under Fundamental Rule 44 of the state. Thus, the word law has been given a wider meaning. Not only enacted law or legislation has been included in the word law, but ordinance, order, by-law, rule, regulation, notification and custom and usage having the force of law have been included within the meaning of law for the purpose of Article 13 and therefore not only enacted law or legislation, but any of these things may be challenged if it is inconsistent with or in derogation of the fundamental rights. 5. In Ahmedabad Women Action Group vs. Union of India, A 1977 SC 3614, the Supreme Court has held that the personal laws such as Hindu law, Muslim law and Christian law are excluded from the definition of law for the purposes of Article 13. 6. The provisions of a manual being compilation of executive orders or circulars issued by the government are not held to be law within the meaning of Article 13. 7. The by-laws framed by a cooperative society under the Cooperative Societies Act do not fall within the ambit of Article 13. 8. Circulars issued by Central Board of Direct Taxes or by the Central Board of Excise and Customs are not law. 9. Flag code which contains guidelines regarding flying of our national flag is not law. Meaning of the term laws in force, Article 13(3)(b). Article 13(3)(b) provides that the expression laws in force, used in Clause 1 thereof, includes laws passed or made by a legislature or other competent authority in the territory of India before the commencement of this Constitution and not previously repealed, notwithstanding that any such law or any part thereof may not be then in operation either at all or in particular areas. It, therefore, includes laws which were on the statute book, though not in operation. The expression, laws in force, includes the laws passed by the British Parliament and applicable to India, like the Fugitive Offenders Act, 1881. The expression, laws in force, includes customs and usages. Thus, laws in force is intended to include laws made by the legislature or other competent authority before the commencement of the Constitution and not previously repealed. Existing law. According to Clause 10 of Article 366, existing law means any law, ordinance, order, by law, rule or regulation passed or made before the commencement of the Constitution of India by any legislature, authority or person having power to make such a law, ordinance, by-law, rule or regulation. Whether the word law includes amendment of the Constitution. This question first time arose in Shankari Prasad vs. Union of India, A 1951 SC 458, where the Supreme Court has held that the word law in Article 13(2) does not include a constitutional amendment, so Parliament could amend the provisions dealing with the fundamental rights. In Sajjan Singh vs. State of Rajasthan, A 1965 SC 845, the majority of the judges expressed their agreement with the reasoning and conclusion arrived in Shankari Prasad case. In Golaknath vs. State of Punjab, A 1967 SC 1643, the Supreme Court overruled the aforesaid decisions and held that Parliament could not amend the fundamental rights. In this case, the court has expressed the view that the word law in Article 13(2) includes the constitutional amendments also, and therefore, if the amendment of the Constitution takes away or abridges the fundamental right, the amendment shall be void. In order to nullify the decision of Golaknath, the Constitution, 24th Amendment, Act, 1971, inserted Clause 4 in Article 13 and Clause 3 in Article 368 to the effect, nothing in Article 13 shall apply to any amendment of this Constitution made under Article 368. The constitutionality of this amendment was upheld by the Supreme Court in Kesavananda Bharti vs. State of Kerala, AIR 1973 SC 1461. It, thus, laid to rest the controversy. It follows that the term law in Article 13 excludes an amendment of the Constitution made under Article 368. The present position is that the word law does not include a constitutional amendment, and therefore Article 13(2) does not affect the amendments made under Article 368. Parliament can amend the Constitution of India including provisions of fundamental rights, but it cannot change the basic structure of the Constitution. Article 13 is not applicable to law declared by the Supreme Court under Articles 141 and 142. In Ashok Kumar Gupta vs. State of UP, 1997, 5 SCC 201, the Apex Court held that Article 13(2) of the Constitution envisages a situation where the state action, be it legislative or executive, violates the fundamental rights. Such law is declared as void but when the previous overruled decision and the new rule laid down by the court as a stare decisis operates prospectively from a given date, namely, either the date of judgment or extended date, such order, judgment is not a legislative act which is void under Article 13(2), but a judicial tool by which the effect of the judgment was given. Article 13(1) and (2) deal with the statute law and not the law declared by the Supreme Court under Article 141 and directions, orders under Article 142. Introduction to Fundamental Rights. Meaning of state and law. Exceptions to fundamental rights. Articles 31A, 31B and 31C provide the cases in which violations of fundamental rights are condoned. Article 13 would not apply in all these matters. Saving of laws providing for acquisition of estates etc. Article 31A. Article 31A, added by the First Constitutional Amendment Act of 1951 and amended by the 4th, 17th and 44th Amendment, saves 5 categories of laws from being challenged on the ground of infringement of Article 14 or Article 19. They are related to agricultural land reforms, industry and commerce and include the following 5 categories of laws. I. Acquisition of estates and related rights by the state, Article 31A, 1a. E. Taking over the management of properties by the state, Article 31A, 1b. E. Amalgamation of corporations, Article 31A, 1c. IV. Extinguishment or modification of rights of directors or shareholders of corporations, Article 31A, 1d, and V. Extinguishment or modification of mining leases. Article 31A, 1A. In KK, Kochuni vs. State of Madras, A 1960 SC 1080, it was held that the object of Article 31A, 1 is to bring about a change in the agricultural economy and facilitate agrarian reforms, and it is applied to legislation affecting the rights of landlords and tenants. It does not apply to a law which seeks to modify the rights of the owner without any reference to agrarian reforms. Proviso to Article 31A further provides that a state law is not immune from judicial review if has not been assented by the President. Another proviso to Article 31A further provides for the payment of compensation at market value when the state acquires the land held by a person under his personal cultivation and the land is within the statutory ceiling limit. Validation of certain acts and regulations, Article 31B, 9th Schedule. Article 31B provides that none of the acts or regulations specified in the 9th Schedule shall be deemed to be void on the ground that such acts and regulations violate any of the fundamental rights given in Part 3 of the Constitution. Article 31B was added by the Constitution, First Amendment, Act, 1951. It is to be read with 9th Schedule to the Constitution, which was also added by Constitution, First Amendment, Act, 1951. So, Article 31B saves the acts and regulations included in the 9th Schedule from being challenged and invalidated on the ground of contravention of any of the fundamental rights. Thus, the scope of Article 31B is wider than Article 31A. Originally, there were only 13 laws in the 9th Schedule, but this has been increased by successive amendments like 4th, 17th, 39th, 42nd, 44th, 47th, 66th, 75th, 78th etc. And at present, the total number of statutes included in the 9th Schedule has risen to 284. In IR. Coelho vs. State of Tamil Nadu, A 2007 SC 861, a 9-judge constitution bench ruled that there could not be any blanket immunity from judicial review of laws included in the 9th Schedule. The object behind Article IB was to remove difficulties and not to obliterate Part 3 in its entirety or judicial review. The court further held that judicial review is a basic feature of the Constitution and it could not be taken away by putting a law under the 9th Schedule. It would be reviewed on the touchstone of basic structure doctrine in each case. It held that the laws placed under the 9th Schedule after the 24th of April 1973 are open to challenge in court if they violated fundamentals rights guaranteed under Articles 14, 15, 19 and 21 or the basic structure of the Constitution. Saving of laws giving effect to certain directive principles, Article 31C, Q. 13. Article 31C was inserted by the 25th Amendment Act of 1971 and contains the following two provisions. A. No law that seeks to implement the socialistic directives specified in Articles 39, B, or 39, C, shall be void on the ground of contravention of the fundamental rights conferred by Article 14 or Article 19. B. No law containing a declaration that it is for giving effect to such policy shall be questioned in any court on the ground that it does not give effect to such a policy. In Keshwananda Bharti vs. State of Kerala, A 1973 SC 1461, Court upheld 25th Amendment. However, it struck down the second provision of Article 31C as unconstitutional as it was destructive of the basic feature of the Constitution, i.e., the judicial review. Article 31C was amended further by 42nd Amendment Act, 1976, and the protection of Article 31C was extended to the laws giving effect to all or any of the principles contained in Part 4 and not merely in Articles 39, B, or 39, C. But Supreme Court in Manerva Mills vs. Union of India, Q. 13, explained the provisions of Article 31C of the Constitution of India. D.U. LL. B. 2008. Air 1980 SC 1789 has struck down this change and declared them as unconstitutional and invalid. After this, Article 31C was restored to its 1971 state. Power of Parliament to modify the fundamental rights. Article 33. Article 33 provides that Parliament may, by law, determine to what extent any of the rights conferred by this part shall, in their application to a. the members of the armed forces or b. the members of the forces charged with the maintenance of public order or c. persons employed in any bureau or other organization established by the state for purposes of intelligence or counterintelligence or d. persons employed in or in connection with the telecommunication system set up for purposes of any force, bureau or organization referred to in clauses a to c. be restricted or abrogated so as to ensure the proper discharge of their duties and maintenance of discipline among them. Note: the 50th Amendment included the later two more categories of persons, i.e., Clause C and D. Under Article 33, Parliament may by law restrict or abrogate any of the fundamental rights in their application to the members of the armed forces or forces charged with maintenance of public order or other analogous forces. The restrictions on fundamental rights under Article 33 can be imposed only by the Parliament by law, and state legislature cannot exercise this power. Article 33 creates an exception to Article 13(2). The object of Article 33 is to ensure the proper discharge of the duties assigned to the person stated in clauses a to d, and also to maintain discipline among them. In the exercise of this power, Parliament has enacted Army Act, 1950, Air Force Act, 1950, Naval Forces, Miscellaneous Provisions, Act, 1950 etc. Martial Law, Article 34. According to Wharton's Law Lexicon 1966-18 Law Ed. 281, 295, martial law means the suspension of ordinary law and the government of a country or part of it by military tribunals. Article 34 of the Constitution provides that, notwithstanding anything in the foregoing provisions of this part, Parliament may by law indemnify any person in the service of the Union or of a state or any other person in respect of any act done by him in connection with the maintenance or restoration of order in any area within the territory of India where martial law was in force, or validate any sentence passed, punishment inflicted, forfeiture ordered, or other act done under martial law in such area. So, Article 34 provides Parliament to make any law for indemnifying any person for acts done during the operation of martial law. The power of Parliament under this section is subject to two conditions. I. The act must have been done in connection with the maintenance or restoration of order, and e. martial law must be in force in the area where the act was done. In ADM Jabalpur vs. S. Shukla, A 1976 SC 1207, the Supreme Court, while distinguishing between martial law and the presidential order made under Article 359, 1. observed that while martial law was generally of a locally restricted application, the presidential order under Article 359, 1. ordinarily has a wide range and effect throughout the country and meant to cover the country as a whole. Martial law envisages the taking over of the situation by military authorities and military courts. Such a taking over, the court said, was certainly outside the provision of Article 359, 1. However, it could perhaps fall under presidential powers under Article 53 and Article 73 read with Article 355. Difference between martial law and emergency. The declaration of a martial law under Article 34 is different from the declaration of a national emergency under Article 352. 1. Martial law affects only fundamental rights, whereas national emergency affects not only fundamental rights but also center-state relations, distribution of revenue and legislative powers between center and state, and may extend the tenure of the parliament. 2. Martial law suspends the government and ordinary law courts, whereas national emergency continues the government and ordinary law courts. 3. Marital law is imposed to restore the breakdown of law and order due to any reason, whereas national emergency can be imposed only on 3 grounds: war, external aggression, or armed rebellion. 4. Martial law is imposed in some specific area of the country, whereas national emergency is imposed either in the whole country or in any part of it. 5. Martial law has no specific provision in the Constitution. It is implicit, whereas national emergency has specific and detailed provision in the Constitution, and it is explicit also.